Well, good morning and welcome back to Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. I'm Scott Fisher and I'm glad you've chosen to study with me this morning. We've begun the new year with a new series entitled, Will the Real Jesus Please Stand Up? We're looking at some of the hard statements Jesus made that are uncomfortable for many Jesus followers. What I've found is that the picture of Jesus that gets presented is often skewed. Certain aspects of who he is or what he said tend to get left out because they present an uncomfortable or even an unexplainable picture of him. This morning we're going to look at some of his statements in the Olivet Discourse as recorded by Luke in Luke chapter 21. The context of the discussion is that the disciples have been marveling over the beauty of the temple and the temple complex, and it was breathtakingly beautiful. But Jesus tells them it's going to be destroyed, that not one stone will be left on top of another. The temple and the city of Jerusalem are going to be destroyed. It's going to happen, and it is a fulfillment of prophecy. They were living in the end of the age. It was the end of the old covenant era, and they were on the verge of the new covenant coming into full realization. The destruction of Jerusalem and the temple was the casting out of Ishmael, the kingdom being taken away from the apostates and given to a people producing the fruit of it. In fact, much of Jesus's parables had to do with this very subject. We're going to pick up the text in Luke chapter 21, verses 20 through 24. But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is near. Then those who are in Judea must flee to the mountains, and those who are in the midst of the city must leave, and those who are in the country must not enter the city, because these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles are fulfilled. Now, the most significant point in these verses is found in verse 22, where Jesus says this, Behold, these are days of vengeance, so that all things which are written will be fulfilled. Now, several questions we have to ask. Number one, whose vengeance? And number two, why is vengeance being unleashed on Jerusalem? And number three, what exactly is being fulfilled? Now, the vengeance is the vengeance of the Lord for the shedding of the blood of the prophets throughout their history, culminating with the crucifixion of Jesus and the murder of the apostles. In Matthew chapter 23, right before Matthew's version of the Olivet Discourse in Matthew 24, Jesus is condemning the Jewish leadership, the chief priests, the Pharisees. And in Matthew 23, verses 34 to 36, he says, Therefore, behold, I am sending you prophets and wise men and scribes. Some of them you will kill and crucify, and some of them you will scourge in your synagogues and persecute from city to city, so that upon you may fall the guilt of all the righteous blood shed on earth, from the blood of righteous Abel to the blood of Zechariah, the son of Berechiah, whom you murdered between the temple and the altar. Truly, I say to you, all these things will come upon this generation. Now, this destruction of Jerusalem and the temple that was going to take place in that generation actually occurred in 70 AD, just as Jesus said it would. It was the vengeance of the Lord unleashed on the covenant-breaking, apostate, first-century Jews in fulfillment of all that was written. In other words, all prophecy came to its ultimate fulfillment in that event. At least if we believe what Jesus said about it. It was the removal of the old covenantal system, the casting out of Ishmael, and the exaltation of Isaac, the children of promise, the new covenantal people comprised of believing Jews and believing Gentiles through faith in Jesus. Now, the next point of significance in Jesus' Olivet Discourse is found in Luke 21, verse 23. Woe to those who are pregnant and to those who are nursing babies in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. Now, Jesus is telling his disciples that Jerusalem is going to be destroyed in fulfillment of prophecy for the historical shedding of innocent blood of all of the prophets, culminating in his own crucifixion and the murder of many of his followers, and it will bring great distress to the land. And then, now notice, in red letters, in the words of Jesus himself, look at this phrase, wrath to this people. What people? The apostate first century Jews. He said it was going to happen, and it happened 40 years later at the 70 AD destruction of Jerusalem. So why is it important that we look at these passages? Because the syrupy Jesus that gets presented by many within contemporary evangelical Christianity is at odds with this Jesus who describes himself in this manner of coming to destroy his enemies, executing wrath and judgment upon the holy city and their temple. Instead of the scriptures foretelling an earth-burning, mountain-melting, cataclysmic end of the world as we know it, still yet in our future, the scriptures foretold the coming destruction of Jerusalem and the old covenantal system. And simultaneously with the destruction came salvation of the righteous and the full realization of the kingdom that knows no end. Through faith in Jesus as the promised Messiah of Israel and Savior of the whole world, you and I are made citizens of the heavenly kingdom. We don't live in fear of a future cataclysmic end of the world. We rule and reign in this life, seated with Christ in the heavenly places. We live in peace. Well, I hope you'll continue to study with me here on Musings of a Texas Preacher Man. And if you live in the Dallas-Fort Worth Metroplex, come out and study with us on Tuesday nights for Tuesday Nights in the Word. I hope you'll go out and make today a great day.